I didn't release my top 25 coasters last year. So the last time I did this, my coaster count sat at just 99 coasters. It's now up to 249, and there's been a lot of changes. During this time, I've lived in both Florida and Georgia and continued visiting some incredible parks throughout the eastern and midwestern United States. I've still got some big parks to get to, so if you're wondering where coasters like Intimidator 305 are on this list, I just haven't gotten around to them quite yet. With that being said, these are the top 25 coasters that I've ridden as of the end of 2024. For an idea of what my top 25 looked like at the end of 2022, here's a list of my rankings from that year. Coasters dropping off the list this year include Millennium Force, Twisted Cyclone, Montu, Thunderhead, Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, Manta, Revenge of the Mummy, Gatekeeper, Cheetah Hunt, Icebreaker, Mindbender, Wild Eagle, and Gemini. Before we kick off the official list, some other notable coasters just missing the cut include Lost Coaster Superstition Mountain, Storm Runner, Sky Rush, and Millennium Force. So starting us off at number 25 is Diamondback at Kings Island in Mason, Ohio. I haven't been to Kings Island in a couple of years now and hope to get back next summer. Diamondback is in the top tier of B&M hypers for me, but I found the rattle to be just a little bit much, which goes for a lot of the B&Ms at Kings Island. The airtime definitely makes up for it though, as well as that fun splashdown to end the ride. Number 24 is Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. Shockwave is one of the untouched Schwarzkopf coasters remaining in the US, and it needs to be protected at all cost. If Cedar Flags touches this ride in any manner, I will be very upset. I already have to deal with a maimed version of Mindbender at my home Six Flags park. You all have already ruined enough green coasters for this year. Now to talk about the ride itself. The loops are incredibly intense, and Shockwave also mixes in some shocking moments of ejector airtime with just a lap bar. I wanted to rank this ride higher, but I think you'll understand why when this list continues to unfold. Do not touch Shockwave. Number 23 is Time Traveler at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Another one of my favorites that I rode for the first time this year. Most of my friends rank this higher than me, but I struggle with some motion sickness. I can't do many flat rides due to the spinning, but I found it to really depend on the ride with Time Traveler. I love this ride enough for that first drop alone. It's some of the most lethal ejector airtime I've ever experienced, and you hit it at a different angle every single time you ride. Do yourself a favor and ride in the back for this moment. Hitting every element differently depending on the ride also gives a big re-rideability boost for a lot of riders, but it also determined how I felt physically afterwards. I'm very conflicted with my feelings for this ride, but I'm confident with where I've got it ranked. Number 22 is the Legend at Holiday World in Santa Claus, Indiana. One of my favorite wooden coasters at one of my favorite parks. The forces of this ride are fantastic, and the laterals will get you very comfortable with whoever you're riding with. It's got awesome airtime and is very well maintained. There were a couple of potholes this past season, but I expect those to be taken care of in the off season with how well Holiday World cares for their coasters. I cannot wait to be back at Hollywood Nights in 2025 to get more laps on this fantastic ride. Number 21 is Max Force at Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois. I didn't ride this ride in the front my first ride and walked away a little underwhelmed. However, I went back the next day and rode up front, and it made that launch one of the best I've ever experienced. The hang time and floaty elements that follow with some snap on the roll provide a nice balance. Really, the only thing I would change about this ride is how it ends. The braking on the descent is a little much, but overall, it's an incredible ride. Number 20 is Mystic Timbers at Kings Island in Mason, Ohio. This is currently my favorite GCI, but I need some re-rides on Thunderhead to really make that call. The layout through the woods, and even just the slightest touch of theming that it has, really puts this ride over the top for me. Add in GCI's lap bars and the ability to get some amazing airtime, and you've got yourself an incredible ride. Mystic Timbers was my favorite wooden coaster in my previous rankings, but that has since changed a lot. Number 19 is Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Islands of Adventure in Orlando, Florida. Universal Creative and Intamin absolutely knocked this one out of the park. It's unfortunate the lines are always so long because this ride is just so re-rideable. The theming is one of the best on any coaster in the world, and if you're a fan of the Harry Potter books or films, you're going to love this ride. Getting the ride in the motorbike seat also makes the ride just that much better. Islands of Adventure is the park that made me an enthusiast, so this is one of those rides that has a special place in my heart. Number 18 is Mako at SeaWorld Orlando in Orlando, Florida. Just down the road from Islands of Adventure is Mako, which is neck and neck for my favorite B&M Hyper that I've ridden. Way back when, Mako briefly had a spot as my number 1 coaster, and it's held up pretty well since then. The 5-second airtime hill stands out as my favorite element, but the first turn after the first drop is also a ton of fun. I have a thing for coasters by the water, and Mako does that not just once, but twice. The trim and mid-course brakes are a little overkill on Mako, and the momentum definitely slows down later in the ride. But I still thoroughly enjoy the graceful ending, and don't knock the ride that much for it. There's just one other B&M Hyper that I enjoy more. Wasting no time with that, number 17 is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia in Atlanta, Georgia. Goliath is currently my favorite B&M Hyper, and I think it'll probably stay that way for a while. There's probably some home park bias here, but I know this isn't an unpopular opinion, and the only B&M Hyper I've got left in America is Apollo's Chariot. Goliath is currently getting a repaint, so it's good to see the chain taking good care of this ride. I just wish they'd retrack the first 2 valleys because they are very rough. As much as I complain about roughness on coasters, for some reason this doesn't bother me if I'm in the front or the back of the train, so I don't knock the ride for it at all. Goliath packs in not just your typical floater airtime on a B&M Hyper, but also some ferocious ejector airtime, and great blackout-inducing positive Gs during that double helix. This is the best B&M Hyper in America, and I don't see any debate. Number 16 is Orion at Kings Island in Mason, Ohio, the last entry from Kings Island on this list. Whether you consider this as a Hyper or a Giga, blah blah blah, it's still an amazing ride. It still has a 300-foot drop and speeds over 90 miles per hour. This middle section of the ride is still a little weird and kills some momentum, but overall you've got amazing airtime at multiple points throughout the ride. I just wish more parks had Giga coasters like this. Stop hating on Orion. Plenty of us would be lucky to have it at our home parks. Number 15 is King the Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey. Or formerly at Great Adventure. I'm sure everyone watching this is already painfully aware of the controversy surrounding the closing of King the Ka. I was fortunate enough to get just one ride on this coaster last year, and it was my first Strata coaster. All I have to really remember it by is this blurry picture, which, to be fair, is what riding King the Ka kind of feels like. It's a total blur. Launching from 0 to 128 miles per hour and rocketing up the 456-foot tower is so intense and bizarrely doesn't feel that high up, even though it was the tallest coaster in the world. I vividly remember looking down at the parking lot for a split second thinking about just that. Knowing that I was 456 feet up in the air, but not totally making sense in my head. Then the drop down is a total gut punch as well, before finishing the ride with a massive hill. King the Ka is going to be dearly missed, and I truly hope there's a way it can be modified by Intamin to let it live on another day. Long live the King. Number 14 is El Toro, also located at Six Flags Great Adventure, just across the midway in fact. This is beginning to get into the realm of coasters that I have a really hard time ranking against one another. I'm absolutely obsessed with the airtime on El Toro, and the sound that those upstops make against the prefab track. The first half of the ride is one of my favorites in the world, but I will admit that I'm not the biggest fan of the second half of the ride outside of the Rolling Thunder Hill. It also had a few nasty potholes, and has had some troubles in recent years. It sounds like it's going to get some much needed TLC in the coming years, and if that's the case, I could see it moving up further on this list. At this point in time, El Toro is my second favorite wooden coaster that I've ridden. Number 13 is Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta Texas in San Antonio, Texas. When not almost obliterating my hands on the support beams of the first inversion, I quite enjoyed this ride. I had never watched a POV of Iron Rattler, and aside from the first drop in Quarry Wall, I really didn't know a whole lot about it. I didn't find that it lost much momentum like I've heard other people say. This is one of the best first drops in a coaster, not just an RMC. The interaction with the Quarry Wall adds a whole other fun element to the ride. While this is the first RMC on this list, it's far from my least favorite. I'm also a big fan of the old RMC trains, and the Zero Car and Iron Rattler is one of the best out there. Number 12 is Lightning Rod at Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I got the second version of Lightning Rod after the launch had been neutered, and some iBox track had been added. So I never got to experience the original, and I still haven't experienced the new chain lift version. To be honest, I'm kind of avoiding it. I'm more excited about riding Thunderhead to give it more of a fair ranking, as I think it has a chance to make this list. When I did Lightning Rod, the launch was still pretty solid, but it did crawl over the top before having an amazing drop down over the mountain. The backside of the ride had a few potholes, but nothing too bad at the time, while maintaining its intensity and relentless ejector airtime. The highlight of the ride was obviously the quad down, and from what I've been told, this still holds up even after the chain lift was added. So I hope that's true. This is a weird coaster to rank, but I've got it at number 12 for now, because of the positive experience I got when it was able to stay open. Number 11 is Wildcats Revenge at Hershey Park in Hershey, Pennsylvania. This blew me away. This opened the same year as my home park RMC Air Force One did, so I was curious how this other Joe Dre's creation would hold up. I was floored by how aggressive this ride was. The way it crosses over itself in such a compact layout is something I found to be relatively unique for RMCs that I'd ridden to this point. I even got to ride with the fun little lasso strap that they had in the trains at the time. I did, however, walk away with one big complaint, and that was the sudden lateral moments that felt like I hit autocomplete on Planet Coaster. I cracked the sides of my ribs and or arms on every ride, even when I knew it was coming. This probably would have ranked higher in this list if it wasn't for those moments. But I still hold this ride in very high regard, and it gets me really excited for what RMC and Joe Dre is going to cook up going forward. Number 10 is Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri, another RMC. This is my favorite roller coaster at my favorite theme park. But I've got to start off by saying that pothole at the bottom of the first drop is nasty, and the worst I've ever experienced. However, it was not as bad in all seats, and the rest of the ride was totally smooth. Outlaw Run is one of the few rides that has genuinely given me a fright because I could not comprehend how it was staying on the tracks with how fast it was going. It's probably my second favorite night ride behind Voyage. It's got incredible airtime and pacing, as well as ridiculous intensity, and it finishes with that fun double corkscrew to end off the ride. Number 9 is Maverick at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. I've always held Maverick in relatively high regard, but I got a nearly flat launch for the second half of the ride this year that cemented it in my top 10 for another year. I do wish this had only lap bars, but at least there's not the cheetah hunt style over the shoulder restraints. I genuinely debated putting this above its neighbor this year, but I just couldn't quite get to that point. Maverick is still smooth with absolutely lethal ejector airtime, and of course interacts with water, so that obviously means I'm going to enjoy it more. I also love a coaster that interacts with terrain, either natural or man-made, and the way Maverick weaves in and out of the rockwork and tunnels, it just doesn't get much better than that. Number 8 is Fury 325 at Carowinds in the Carolinas. Fury actually crosses in the two different states. Some of my first rides on Fury 325 were in the rain, which is extremely painful. Flying at nearly 100 miles per hour in the rain is an experience to say the very least. I feel like I've got this ranked too low, but the furthest I could see it climbing is just one spot. Fury's first drop feels like it is never going to end, and the speed that it maintains is absolutely staggering. There's one trim hill that's kind of annoying, but it also turned an airtime hill into a bit of an ejector airtime moment when sitting in the back of the train, so it didn't really bother me too much. I haven't ridden this coaster in over 2 years, and I have to make sure I change that next year. Again, I wish I had a giggle like this at one of my home parks. Number 7 is Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. Another entrant into my top 10 from Cedar Point. And it won't be the last. What can I say about Steel Vengeance that hasn't already been said? It's a hyper hybrid that has an incredibly long duration. There was one point during the second half of the ride that I was wondering how the ride was still going. I would disagree with what some people say about it being too long and that it needs to end at the mid-course breaks. While it does seem to last maybe a little too long, the second half does add value to the ride for me, and I really enjoy weaving through the giant wooden structure that supports the ride. Yes, the locker system is also annoying, and security even more so, but I'm still thrilled to ride it whenever I get the chance. I got to stay in the lakeside cabins for opening weekend this past year, and woke up to the sight of Steel Vengeance each morning. It's hard to top that, but something else in opening weekend this year did. Number 6 is Top Thrill 2 at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. Yes, I got to ride it, and yes, it is that good. I know this ride has been plagued with issues due to how Zamperla built the thing, but goodness gracious, this thing is incredible. The first launch isn't a whole lot, but everything after that absolutely delivers. The backwards launch reaches 100 miles per hour and hurdles you almost completely up the 420-foot spike. Looking down on Power Tower is a wild experience, and waving to your friend from the midway that far below you as you stall at the top is a sensation you're not going to get anywhere else. You then fall all the way down the spike into the third launch. You wouldn't think that 20 mile per hour launch would feel like much, but there was a stark difference between going 100 miles per hour and 120 miles per hour. This is where the front row really shines. Riding the back row for the spike and the top hat, and riding the front row for the speed. There was also solid airtime on the top hat and some serious whip on the roll on the way back down. Top Thrill 2 absolutely lives up to the hype, and I really hope they can get things sorted out so more people can enjoy this ride. I'm kind of tired of my friends all hating me for it. Before we get into the top 5, if you've stuck through me blabbering for this long, I'd really appreciate if you could drop the video a like and subscribe for more roller coaster and theme park content just like this. Number 5 is Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa in Tampa, Florida. This also seems low for Iron Gwazi, but my top 5 is so crowded it's tough to justify moving it any higher. I used to live just 3 miles from this ride and got many marathons in to truly appreciate just how good it is. I know a lot of people have it as their number 1 coaster, and I can't argue with that one bit. This is another elite RMC hyper hybrid that I can't wait to get back to ride again. I went from riding multiple times a week to just one day this past year. I need to change that. The first drop, Outer Bank, and Death Roll are all elite elements that make up possibly the best opening sequence to start off a coaster in the world, and it doesn't lose any of that momentum all the way into the final breaks. I've got some of my best memories on this coaster, and it should be cemented in my top 10 for a long time. Number 4 is the Voyage at Holiday World in Santa Claus, Indiana. The annual pilgrimage for Hollywood Nights is locked in again for my 3rd time in 2025, and I couldn't be more excited. I've got multiple first timers to take along with me this time, and I can't wait to watch their reaction to riding the best wooden roller coaster in the world. I try to be more general when talking about the Voyage because I went in virtually blind, and I encourage as many of you as possible to do the same thing as well if you have not ridden it. There was elite floater and ejector airtime, and probably the best pacing on any coaster I have ever ridden. I mentioned earlier with Outlaw Run that I'm genuinely terrified of it coming off the track, and I feel that exact same way with the Voyage. Turning off the trims makes it even more insane. Add in the darkness at night and your best friends all collectively losing their minds with you, and this could possibly move up further in my rankings in the future. Holiday World takes such good care of this ride, and I hope it is going to be around for a long time to come. Let me know if you're going to be at Hollywood Nights next year. Number 3 is Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind at Epcot in Orlando, Florida. I've only had 2 rides on Guardians, but wow. This coaster is not just a ride, it's an experience. The way everybody wants to rule the world fits this coaster is just meant to be if you're lucky enough to get that as your song. The way that the rotating cars interact with the show scenes and circling around a planet really makes it feel like you're traveling through space. I don't know how the Imagineers pulled off something like this, but they did. I just hate how difficult and expensive it is to ride this coaster. If I had everyday access, this is another ride that could potentially be my number 1 coaster. I know some people consider it more of a dark ride or don't rank coasters based on theming, but I totally disagree. Theming and immersion are super important to me when it comes to a ride, and Guardians is a testament of just how much you can elevate a ride. Number 2 is Air Force One at Fun Spot Atlanta, just south of Atlanta, Georgia. If you're new to the channel, this is pretty much my zero coaster, meaning it's virtually impossible for me to rank it fairly. But I really do believe that the ride is that good. This would be in my top 5 even if I hadn't watched it get built piece by piece and rode before its grand opening in March of last year. This ride is very similar to others in my top 10 when it comes to pacing, intensity, and airtime. It's the perfect mix of negative Gs, positive Gs, and zero Gs, and features some really unique elements like the Raven Trust Dive and barrel roll over the arcade. To think that RMC initially wanted to cut out a chunk of the roof to make it visible from inside the building is nuts, but totally on brand for them. I can't forget to mention the stall either, as you feel like you just hang there forever. I'm closing in on 1,000 rides on Air Force One, and I might be there before this video is uploaded. Thank you FunSpot, and thank you RMC for making this ride happen. And finally, number 1 is Veloci Coaster at Islands of Adventure in Orlando, Florida, maintaining its spot at the top for the 4th straight year. This coaster is so special to me, arguably another zero coaster, but I know others that have it as their number 1 as well. Veloci Coaster is the roller coaster that piqued my interest in coasters while it was being built and lived up to all of the hype. It has incredible theming, it interacts with rockwork, it goes over and along water, it has intense launches, and it features some incredible airtime. I always take a quick look around the park while at the top of the top hat to take it all in. This ride is also my favorite to just sit and watch, as there are so many places to take in from so many different angles. I don't know what coaster has a shot at topping Veloci Coaster, so it might be here for a while. Thank you all for watching. Those are my top 25 coasters as of the end of 2024. What do you think about my rankings? Be sure to have some fun debates in the comments below. 2025 is shaping up to be my biggest coaster yet, with trips to California and Europe. There's a possibility that my coaster count could double next year, so it's going to be fun to see how this list changes. I'm planning on doing a live stream and or video next year where I blindly rank all of my coasters by drawing a name or number out of a hat to see how those compare to my rankings. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. If you want to follow me on Instagram as well, then you can find me there at Dr_Coaster. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.